In 1789, a single loaf of bread in Paris costs more than a common worker earns in an entire month. While the people in the streets starve, King Louis XVI lives in a palace with over 2,000 rooms and enough gold to make a dragon jealous. This isn't a bad economy. It is the spark for a fire that burns down a 1,000-year-old monarchy. This is the moment the most powerful family in Europe meets a very sharp, very permanent end. But how does the most powerful family in Europe lose everything to a crowd of hungry peasants? Welcome to History Bites, where we take the wildest, weirdest, most jaw-dropping moments in history and explain them fast. If you love the kind of history that sounds impossible but actually happened, subscribe. Imagine living in a city where the air smells like sewage and your stomach constantly growls. This is France 235 years ago. This is roughly 150 years before your great-grandparents are born. Society is split into three groups called estates. The first two groups, the church and the nobles, own almost everything and pay zero taxes. The third estate, which is 98% of the people, pays for everything. Imagine if your school has a rule where the top two students get free pizza every day, but the rest of the school has to pay for it out of their own pockets. That is France in 1789. And here's where it gets really wild. The king thinks everything is fine because he never leaves his bubble. He lives in Versailles, a palace so big it takes 20 minutes to walk from the bedroom to the dining hall. He is completely disconnected from the reality of his people. France is broke. They spend all their money helping the Americans win their revolution against the British. Now the bill is due. To make matters worse, the weather turns into a nightmare. Massive hailstorms destroy the wheat crops. No wheat means no bread. For a French person in the 1700s, bread is not a side dish. It is their entire diet. When the price of a loaf jumps to a month's wages, people stop asking for help and start taking it. Most people don't know this part, but the revolution actually starts with a group of angry mothers. Thousands of women march 12 miles in the rain to the king's palace, armed with kitchen knives and pikes, demanding bread. They force the king to move back to Paris, where they can keep an eye on him. The king calls a big meeting called the Estates General to solve the money problem. But the third estate realizes the system is rigged. Every group gets one vote. The two rich groups always outvote the poor group 2-1. The commoners decide they have had enough. They walk out and try to meet on their own, but the king locks the doors to their meeting hall. Now this is where history gets genuinely strange. Instead of going home, they march to the nearest indoor space they can find, which happens to be the king's private tennis court. They stand on the green floor and swear they will not leave until France has a fair constitution. It is called the tennis court oath. Imagine your government gets locked out of the capital, so they move to a local gym and decide to rebuild the country there. July 14, 1789. A massive crowd gathers in Paris. They are terrified the king is bringing in the army to crush them. They need gunpowder to defend themselves. They march to the Bastille, a giant stone fortress that represents the king's power. It is the ultimate high-security prison. The crowd storms the walls. They do not have heavy machinery, so they take the building apart brick by hand. This is the point of no return. King Louis XVI writes in his diary that day, nothing. He is talking about his hunting trip, but he misses the fact that his kingdom is ending. Here's the part nobody puts in textbooks. The Bastille only holds 7 prisoners at the time. It is not about the people inside. It is about sending a message that the king is no longer in charge. The king and queen, Marie Antoinette, realize they are in danger. They decide to run for it. They dress up as servants and sneak out of the palace in the middle of the night in a fast carriage. They are heading for the border to meet an army that will help them take back the country. They almost make it, but they are stopped in a small town called Varennes. A local postmaster looks at the king, then looks at the money in his hand. He recognizes the king because his face is printed on every coin in France. Imagine trying to go undercover while your face is the profile picture for the entire country's currency. It is a massive failure. The people feel betrayed. They no longer see Louis XVI as their father. They see him as a runaway traitor. By the way, here is a curious fact. Marie Antoinette never actually says, "Let them eat cake." That is a myth made up by her enemies to make her look heartless. She is actually quite charitable, but by this point, the people are too angry to care about the truth. They want change, and they want it now. The revolution takes a dark turn. A doctor named Joseph Ignace Guillotin suggests a new machine for executions. He wants something that is fast and painless for everyone, regardless of their social class. The revolutionaries love the idea. They call it the national razor. Stop and think about that for a second. They believe they are being enlightened and fair by making execution more efficient. In 1793, King Louis XVI is led to the wooden platform. He tries to give a speech, but the Revolutionary Guards order a drum roll to drown out his words. The blade drops. A few months later, Marie Antoinette follows him. This leads to the Reign of Terror. A man named Maximilien Robespierre takes control. He believes that to protect the revolution, he has to eliminate anyone who might disagree with it. It is like a game of Among Us, where everyone is accusing everyone else of being the imposter. If you are caught using the old titles like Sir instead of Citizen, you could end up at the guillotine. Over 16,000 people meet the same fate in just 1 year. And the craziest thing, it actually worked to change the world forever, but it also consumed the people who started it. Eventually, the revolutionaries turn on Robespierre himself, and he becomes a victim of his own machine. The French Revolution ends with the rise of a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte, who eventually declares himself emperor. It seems like a circle. They start with a king and end with an emperor. But the world is never the same. The revolution proves that when the gap between the rich and the poor gets too wide, the system eventually snaps. It gives the world the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which says that all people are born free and equal. Modern democracy starts here, in the middle of all that chaos and bread lines. History is full of moments that sound impossible, but every single one of them actually happened. That's what makes it better than fiction. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. We post every week, and every video will teach you something your history teacher hasn't mentioned yet. And drop your answer in the comments. If you were a peasant in 1789, would you have joined the mob at the Bastille or stayed home to stay safe? The French Revolution changed everything, but it started with just one hungry crowd.